But I decided that would be too flippant a way in which to begin. I don't know how many of you follow the writings of the great philosopher Maureen Dowd, but she at one point came up with a phrase which I think has been echoed since by Colin Powell, or maybe she got it from him or he from her, I can't be certain. But you know what the Pottery Barn motto is. Probably, yeah, it may have been the other way around. You know what the motto is of the Pottery Barn: you break it, you own it. And I remember thinking at first that was a flippant thing for Maureen Dowd to say about Iraq and the United States. But then I thought, as a matter of fact, there's a good deal of truth in that Iraq was already broken. I've mentioned some of the reasons why that was so. And we already owned it. If there's to be an inquest into what's gone wrong and what's gone right in Iraq, and I think that there ought to be, and I'm more than willing to take part in it, and have so far not refused or declined any challenge to do so, if there is to be this inquest, then it cannot start 3 years ago, not for anyone with any sense at all of history or for geopolitics. The very latest, I believe, or do I mean the very earliest it could begin? The very latest, really, would be 1969, when 68, 69, when, according to many boastful accounts by our Central Intelligence Agency, we were successful in installing the anti-communist wing of the Iraqi, the most anti-communist wing of the Iraqi Ba'ath Party, the wing that had Saddam Hussein as its chief police enforcer in power in Baghdad. That seems to me to give us quite a lot of responsibility right there and then, if only that were all. But the great Baptist human rights campaigner and moralist Jimmy Carter, 10 years after that, gave, as we know, explicit permission to Saddam Hussein to invade Iran, and gave him also, a phrase that's become familiar to us recently, false intelligence, to the effect that a quick strike against Iran would demolish the regime of Ayatollah Khomeini, release the American hostages, re-elect Jimmy Carter, other wonderful consequences that could be imagined. And we know what the outcome of that was. I dwelt on it a little. One of the most horrifying wars of modern times, human wave assaults using children, mutual bombardment of civilian targets, the unleashing of chemical and biological weapons, perhaps 1.5 million dead, for nothing. Through the entire course of that war, the succeeding Reagan administration was the armorer, a trainer and diplomatic protector, reflagger of the tankers of Saddam Hussein. And when the war was over, and when Saddam Hussein continued to use those sinews of war to pursue his campaign of extermination in northern Iraq, the flow of American weaponry, advice and counsel and protection did not cease. This seems to me to give us a very weighty responsibility in walk away from this. We owe them, okay? They owe us too, in a sense, because their country was the site and the place, and their leader was, it's their misfortune, the leader of all this and planner of all this aggression and violation of international law. But we have to make up for what we helped him do to them too. So all talk of withdrawal is idle. There's no such thing as a withdrawal. A maimed and broken Iraq was in our future, was in our present, and was in our past, and still is. This is a responsibility which we cannot evade. And that's why I sympathize with so much of what Professor Arato says about the incompetence with which this mandate has been discharged. But let there be no mistake. The rubric of this meeting is quite correct to mention Iraq and America in the same breath. And I hope I've shown that it's in some way an indissoluble connection, and one to which we haven't begun to live up, but one to which everyone here considers themselves a citizen can contribute something. There are mass graves to be dug up. There are women to be protected from both kinds of fundamentalists, those who are against the intervention and those who are for it. There's the national minority of Kurdistan to be confirmed in its autonomy. There's the ecology of the marsh Arabs in the south, the oldest wetlands in the Middle East, to be reflooded and recuperated. There's plenty of work for everyone to do, and anyone who wants to get any advice on how to contribute is welcome to ask me afterwards. And thank you for your patience meanwhile. I'm sorry I had to be fanned to a halt there. But I just wanted to clear up.
Okay, Martín and I have several questions that we've been wanting to ask both of you. I'll start with Andrew. What should have been done in Iraq instead of going to war? Or in general, what should we do with massively abusive dictatorial states as an international community?
Well, I think that I I spent a lot of my life on that problem, not in relationship to the Near or Middle East, thank God. And I think that one answer is certainly not that one should not intervene, because one always intervenes. I've intervened in 2 countries myself, in Poland and Hungary. One intervenes because, in fact, these matters are international matters. Human rights, problems of autonomous civil society are international matters. But it's extremely important to distinguish between hard and soft intervention. And I think it's very important that in the 1980s and 1990s, even including the South African case, wherein these sanctions were applied, interventions stayed within international law. By the way, Chapter 7 is binding even in relationship to the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention does not mandate anyone on their own. It doesn't mean somebody violates the Genocide Convention and Denmark decides to go to war against that country. You need a Chapter 7 authorization anyway. Of course, one could accuse Saddam of having violated the Genocide Convention, but there is still a need for a Chapter 7 authorization, and it's not up for an imperial superpower to decide, not in 91 when he's actually violating the convention, but in 2003 when he may be violating it, but not in the same way as he has at other moments. This is a question of Chapter 7, at least if you're talking about international law and not about, superpower morality. Anyway, soft intervention works in many cases, and I think that is certainly preferable from a point of view of democratization. Its chances, as we see the track record, even in places now like the Ukraine and Georgia, are much better. Military intervention, if you really, I heard in a very bad speech Francis Fukuyama in Paris a few weeks ago, in the way that political scientists tend to do it, counted up American military interventions, and he came up with 25, which had to do with regime change. He's actually mixing apples and pears, as political scientists tend to in these cases. But nevertheless, out of the 25, he comes up with 3 successes. And that is not a great track record, especially if you take Germany and Japan as 2 of the successful cases, with a very long history of rule of law states and constitutionalism, and relatively short interruptions